Climate change was once considered an emerging risk, and as such it was discussed in a general way. But it's evident that this is changing, and the consequences of not taking climate change seriously could be dramatic, not just for the planet, but also for unprepared organisations and those that helm them. My name is Jonathan Swift, and I'm delighted to say that I'm joined in the studio today by Kennedy's partner, John Bruce, and associate Louise Campbell to explore this topic in more detail. Welcome both of you.
Thank you.
So Louise, what is the current state of play regarding climate change litigation in the UK?
So climate change litigation in the UK is currently broadly based in bringing claims against governments and local councils in the planning space and or seeking enforcement of the government's commitments under the Paris Agreement. So for example, we've seen claims relating to the expansion of Stansted and Heathrow airports, neither of which were successful. And also we've seen claims early this year brought by an NGO against the government seeking to force them to reduce the carbon emissions targets quicker than the current commitments.
So John, what trends or differences is Kennedy's seeing overseas in terms of climate change litigation?
Sure, yeah, there is different trends overseas in a number of different respects. Firstly, to geographical location. There is a lot of climate litigation out there, primarily in the wealthier countries. So the market leader, if you like, is definitely the USA, followed by Australia, then the UK, and then some other wealthy European nations and Australia. That's not to say the less wealthy nations aren't also facing climate change litigation. For instance, there's been recent cases in Colombia, India and Pakistan. In terms of the targets of the litigation, it's very similar to it is in the UK. So 80% of all litigation tends to be against governmental organisations, whether at the national level or at the local level. Planning laws is a common area of dispute. There's also, though, a lot of litigation against what are called carbon majors. So these are entities which are the big producers of climate change gases, primarily coal-producing companies or companies connected to the coal industry, but also cement-producing companies. The sort of litigation which is made is again, as is the case in the UK, looking at keeping countries' governments committed to the climate change initiatives that they've agreed and introduced. Interestingly, in the USA, the litigation isn't always on the part of those trying to protect the environment. Quite a lot of the litigation is actually by other parties trying to limit the impact of the climate change litigation, and that's in particular been the case in the USA. However, fortunately, hopefully most would say, without particular effect. So a lot of what President Trump has done of late is to seek to roll back some of the climate change legislation that was put in place by Obama. A lot of companies and entities and NGOs have tried to challenge Trump's legislation, and in the main they've been successful.
So Louise, how do you see climate change litigation evolving in the near future? What will be the drivers for that change?
I think the main driver of change in climate change litigation will be the advancement of scientific developments which will be able to establish the causal link between the specific weather event and the harm that flows from that event. Secondly, I think we'll also see more claims relating to the costs of transitioning to a low carbon economy, or also to the cost of adapting to operating in a warmer climate as a result of climate change. And finally, I think we'll also see more claims. We'll see a shift away from claims against the so-called carbon majors and more towards financial institutions and fund managers in terms of failure to consider and or disclose the risks of climate change on their investments.
John?
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add to that is one of the drivers. I think there's more passion in the world about climate change, and we're seeing increasing amounts of environmental activism, and indeed at the youth level in particular, and the so-called Greta effect I think will mean that we see a lot more of climate change litigation in the future.
So John, taking that on board, how do you see insurers responding to the issue of climate change presently, and again, how do you see this evolving in the near future?
Yeah, I think it's pretty fair to say that some insurers are pretty much ignoring it, but there are a significant body of insurers who are trying to address climate change, and the main way in which there's presently a group of 14 insurers is doing is reducing or indeed refusing to insure certain emission-producing industries. So the coal mining industry is a good example. The extent to which they're doing that effectively remains to be seen, but that is certainly a progressive step by some insurers. There is concern, though, that if they do go too far in trying to limit the extent to which they provide insurance, that will simply drive the coal mines, etc., to self-insure, and that means the ability of insurers to influence that area actually reduces rather than increases. Another area where insurers are very active is in research, so it's in their interest, but also for the wider community, that there's lots of research in the impacts of climate change, and they share that research more widely, so I think that's useful. And then finally, it's in terms of investments. After pension funds, insurers are the largest investor in the world, and if they use that might, and it looks like they are beginning to do so, to stop investing in climate emission producing entities, then that's going to have a positive impact. In terms of how that develops in the future, quite straightforward. We simply think more of the same.
Thank you very much, John. Thank you very much, Louise. If you'd like to find out more information about Kennedy's, then please go to their website. And if you'd like to read more about climate change, then please check out the latest Spotlight in Post in association with Kennedy's. Until the next video, it's goodbye from me. Cheerio.